Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I'm really, really glad to be here. Pastor Greg is a good friend, and now I've met the other Pastor Greg. And they both have wonderful wives as well. So anyway, I'm blessed to be here. Thank you for having me. Pastor Greg asked me to speak on Israel and social justice. So I want to start off with defining that word. I took a definition of justice from Webster's Dictionary, a 1913 version. And I did that on purpose because we are fighting a war of words nowadays more than ever in the media, propaganda. You all know that. I don't have to tell you how bad the media is. That's what CAMERA does, the organization I work for. Monitors all the media in English and Hebrew and Arabic and Spanish. And I monitor everything going on in the Christian world about Israel and anti-Semitism. So words are important. So I want to define what I'm talking about, but I also want to take it from 1913 because things have been so corrupted in the last few decades especially. And the word social justice, that term is used to justify all kinds of unbiblical things and to demonize things that are biblical. So I don't want to go into any more detail because I want to keep going in this direction, but I don't think for this audience I need to explain that. I know you get it. Okay, the first, you know how they give multiple points. So the first one is, it's the quality of being just, conformity to the principles of righteousness in all things. We know righteousness is important, but our current culture doesn't understand this. It's practical conformity. Remember, this is from 1913. It's practical conformity to human or divine law. Does our culture nowadays need to hear this? That we need to conform to divine law? It's integrity in the dealings of men with each other. Wow. I mean, each thing I'm saying could be a whole sermon, right? Second point, conformity to truth and reality in expressing opinions and in conduct. Fair representation of facts, honesty, impartiality. Every word here is loaded, and you can you can do the math. You can figure out how each one of these things is describing what we don't have anymore in our culture. Here's the third point, the rendering to everyone his due or right, just treatment, even-handed justice. And then the fourth thing is agreeableness to right, equity, and justice. All right, then I looked up just a few scriptures on justice. This is just a few. You could spend a lot more time on this. The first category is God is just. Deuteronomy 32:4. The rock, his work is perfect. Speaking of God, the rock. His work is perfect. All his ways are justice. A God of faithfulness and without inequity, just and upright is he. That's our foundation. That's who God is. Psalm 33:5. He loves righteousness and justice. The earth is full of the steadfast love of the Lord. Psalm 89:14. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Steadfast love and faithfulness go before you. Okay, second point under here is we are to follow justice. Deuteronomy 16:20. Justice and only justice shall you follow, that you may live and inherit the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Micah 6:8. He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with your God? Proverbs 21:3. To do righteousness and justice is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. Psalm 106:3, blessed are those who observe justice, who do righteousness at all times. Okay, then there's another category of scripture that talk about justice and evil people. Proverbs 28:5, evil men do not understand justice, but those who seek the Lord understand it completely. Proverbs 21:15, when justice is done, it is a joy to the righteous, but terror to evildoers. Proverbs 24:24-25, whoever says to the wicked, you are in the right. We're living in that right now. Whoever says to the wicked, you are in the right, will be cursed by peoples, abhorred by nations, but those who rebuke the wicked will have delight, and a good blessing will come upon them. Okay, fourth category that talk of verses that talk about perversion of justice. Exodus 23:1-3, you shall not spread a false report. You shall not join hands with a wicked man to be a malicious witness. You shall not fall in with the many to do evil, nor shall you bear witness in a lawsuit siding with the many so as to pervert justice. Habakkuk 1:4, so the law is paralyzed and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, so justice goes forth perverted. And then Proverbs 6:16-19. I know you all have read this. There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run to evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers. And I would submit to you that all of the modern day social justice warriors who claim to be fighting for social justice but are advocating for things that are abominations, that they fit all of those 7 things. All right, the final thing is there's a warning and a promise in this last verse. Psalm 37:27-29. Turn away from evil and do good, so shall you dwell forever. For the Lord loves justice. He will not forsake his saints. They are preserved forever, but the children of the wicked shall be cut off. The righteous shall inherit the land and dwell upon it forever. And how can we be the righteous? By knowing the word, right? And following what it teaches. So that's the definition, and that's our scriptural foundation for talking about justice. Right now, I want to talk a little bit about what Esther has to say concerning justice, because she sought justice for her people when they were about to be annihilated. So I want to give you a little bit of background on Esther. You know, Esther tells the story of an attempted genocide of the Jewish people who lived in the ancient Persian Empire. And that was really the whole known world at the time. The bad guy in the story, Haman or Haman in Hebrew. Wow! I'm in the right place. Wow! That was amazing. Haman, he was successful. If he had been successful with his plot to annihilate the Jews, the Jewish people wouldn't have survived. This really was the whole known world at the time, including the land of Israel, where there were still Jews, by the way. People want to tell you that, the Jews were never there until a couple hundred years ago. There were still Jews there. Okay, but think about the consequences. If all the Jews in the ancient Persian Empire had been annihilated 2,500 years ago, it's the time of Esther, there would have been no Jews around at the time Jesus was born. That would have changed everything about Jewish history and our history, because you all know where our faith comes from. I don't have to go into that, but just think about the fact, because sometimes I get questions from Christians, why do we care about Esther? It's this, sounds like a fairy tale that, was written sometime before Jesus. Why should we care? Well, because if Haman had, had been successful, there would have been no Jewish Jesus, there would be no us, right? Okay, well, he wasn't successful, but we know from history that his attempt to wipe out the Jews was far from the last. In fact, literally, you all know this, every generation, somebody rises to kill the Jews. And this reality is what has made Esther and its account of victory over attempted genocide so meaningful to the Jewish people, generation after generation, and it's what makes it so relevant right now to current events, and we're going to get into that more in a bit, the current events. But since the founding of the State of Israel, Israel has had to defend itself against existential danger. This threat to the existence of the Jewish state is even more clear ever since October 7th, 2023, when the terrorist organization Hamas attacked, did horrible atrocities, and ever since then, Israel has been fighting a war on 7 fronts, and it's a war of self-defense. And that's what Esther teaches, is the right to self-defense when you're threatened with murder. Esther records the story of an attempted genocide, but it also reports that the Jews were allowed to defend themselves against anyone who sought to kill them. That is the message of Esther. Pastor Greg mentioned that I compared and contrasted a Greek version with the Hebrew, and the way so many things were changed in the Greek version led Christians throughout the centuries to interpret the story this is a story about Jews who are bloodthirsty, and they love to kill people and then have a party and eat. Well, obviously, that's not what's going on. It's about self-defense. And the message of Esther is that the right and the responsibility of humans to defend themselves against those who intend to murder is a timeless and universal issue of justice. Esther is all about justice. The right to self-defense was not just relevant in Esther's time, it's profoundly relevant right here, right now to all of us, but especially in relation to Israel, because that's the topic I'm supposed to talk about is justice and Israel, and it's very relevant. The Jewish state right now needs to be able to do whatever it needs to do to destroy their enemy's ability to destroy them. Much of the world has forgotten, within days, literally, forgot the atrocities of October 7th. Hamas started it when it invaded Israel and committed all those atrocities. What Israel did after that was go in and try to destroy all of Hamas's abilities to be able to attack again. Well, right now, Israel didn't start the current, what the world is calling a war with Iran. This is not a war that just started on February 28th. This is an operation in an ongoing war. Both the United States and Israel named it. We have different names for it. The Americans and the Israelis have different names, but it's an operation. It's an ongoing war that Iran started, not Iran the people. There's a complete distinction here, not the Iranian people. There's this radical Islamic regime that took over Iran 47 years ago. And they started this war the very first day they were in power, and ever since, every day, they have chanted death to America, death to Israel, every day. If you remember, the first thing they did was take over the U.S. embassy in Tehran and hold people hostage for over a year until there was a shift in the American administration, and they thought, oh, we better not deal with this guy. And they released the hostages. It was Ronald Reagan when he came into office. They decided, oh, he probably really means to do what he says he's going to do. And they released the hostages. But ever since then, they have been attacking Americans. There's American blood on their hands. There's Israeli blood on their hands. There are many people's blood on the hands of this regime. And it is really a war against Western civilization that they are waging. this is not all about Israel. You will hear in the media, oh, Israel started this war. Like I said, what's going on right now is not the war. It's the latest operation in an ongoing war. The other thing you're hearing in the media all the time is, oh, Israel dragged the United States into this. Because again, when you have a whole anti-Semitic worldview and an anti-Israel worldview, it has to all be the Jews' fault, right? Well, it's ludicrous. Not only is it not true, but it's ludicrous to even accuse that, because if you've watched our current president at all, you know, he's not the kind of guy that just gets led around by anybody. So he makes his decisions to do what he thinks is best. So the criticism that is going on right now about Israel and the U.S. is completely off the charts. Both of our governments, Israeli and American government, need to do what they need to do to protect the lives of their citizens. They are protecting us. They're also protecting all of Western civilization from the threat of nuclear weapons. That's what this is all about. Iran was threatening Israel first because they're closer. Israel's on the front lines for all of us, for all of Western civilization. But we were next. They were planning to be able to attack us as well. Well, this is nothing new. Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun, right? Throughout history, the interpretations that I mentioned before that have been made about the story of Esther and the Jews of Persia that have painted them as the aggressors, that the Jews of ancient Persia were the aggressors, that they were bloodthirsty, and that they took the initiative. It's not true, and it's not true today of Israel. In chapter 3 of Esther, Haman, he falsely accused the Jews, in order to get permission from the king to authorize the genocide. And the king gave him permission to do so, and he issued a decree. And that's in Esther 3:13. We have the content of that decree. This is what it says. Letters were sent by the hand of the runners to all the provinces of the king to exterminate, to kill, and to destroy. They really meant business. I mean, if you exterminate everybody, they're done. Or if you kill everybody, they're done. Or if you destroy them. And they had to say it 3 times. From young to old, children and women in one day, on the 13th of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. So after Esther learned about the decree, she asked the king to reverse it. And the king said, it's not possible to change a law, and that is true. Part of my dissertation on Esther, one whole chapter, was on documenting all of the historical accuracy that is in the book, because all the critics wanted to say, oh, it's a fairy tale and there's nothing true. It is true. In the ancient Persian law, once the king had issued a decree and it had his stamp on it, it couldn't be revoked, couldn't be changed. But the king said, but you can issue a new one. So that gets done by chapter 8. So in Esther 8:11, it says, the king allowed the Jews who were in every city to assemble and to stand for their lives, to exterminate, to kill, to destroy. Same 3 words again. All the army of the people or province, their adversaries, children and women, and to plunder their possessions. Okay, that verse starts with, the king allowed the Jews to assemble and to stand for their lives. In the Hebrew, those verbs, allowed, assemble, stand, makes it clear the Jews were only allowed to assemble and stand. It's a position of defense. And in that defensive position, then they could exterminate, kill, and destroy anybody who came against them to try to kill them. The Jews were only allowed to do to their enemies what their enemies were planning to do to them. It's the same with Israel today. Israel does not start wars, but they're sure going to defend themselves if somebody comes against them. But what it means in Esther and today, if nobody tried to kill Jews, nobody would die. And this reminds me of a statement that's been made by a number of Israeli leaders in one form or another, but I think it started with Prime Minister Golda Meir, the woman prime minister. She said, and many leaders have said similar things, if Israel lays down their arms, there will be no more Israel. But if the Arabs were to put down their arms, there would be no more war. That's really the truth. Israel wants to live in peace. It has not initiated any of the wars it's been forced to fight. Every war has been fought in response to Arab nations in the past. And now in the last year, it's also in response to Iran, which is not Arab. The Iranians are not Arab. And this regime is not Arabs. So this current war that Israel and the US are involved in is a defensive war for the sake of protecting Jewish lives against enemies who seek to destroy them. Just as the Jews of ancient Persia had the right to self-defense when threatened with murder, America and Israel have the right and responsibility as sovereign states to protect their populations. After Mordecai learned about, I love you guys. Can I go to church here? It's kind of far. I live in South Florida, so it's kind of far, but I love it. Okay, so after Mordecai learned about Haman's decree, he sent word to Esther to tell her she needed to go to the king, right, to plead for the lives of her people. And in Esther 4:10-11, Esther tells him, it's against the law to go to the king. I can't go to the king unless I've been summoned. Anybody who goes to the king without being summoned could be killed. So in Esther 4:13-14, Mordecai answered her. He said, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? That's verse 14 of Esther 4. And we all know that saying. Everybody says it now. Oh, you've come here to do this or whatever for such a time as this. And I really feel like it's been trivialized. I have to comment on this because we say it all the time now. Oh, you're here for such a time as this. And the verse has been taken out of context. Nobody's thinking about the context when they're saying that lightly. The context was this, that Esther was being asked to go to the king at the risk of her own life. Mordecai's saying, you've been placed there. You need to do what you can do where you've been put. So in verse 15, Esther responds after, she obviously struggled with this. I mean, none of us would make this decision lightly to do something that we know is going to put our life in danger. So she responded to Mordecai and said, okay, I'll go. And what'd she say at the end of that statement? She said, and if I die, I die. Well, just like Esther and the Jews of Persia, we're living in perilous times. And just like Esther, we've all been placed in a position, wherever we are, whatever you do, you're in that position because God's put you there. And we need to do whatever we can, wherever we are, in spite of opposition, in spite of the danger. Times are not getting better. It's heating up. We're heading for the end times. Every generation of Christians has thought they were living in the end times. Well, we're closer than they were, I can tell you that. I don't know when it is. I'm not putting any dates on anything. I'm just telling you it's heating up, okay? And so when Esther was considering those dangers, Mordecai told her she wasn't even safe in the palace. And if she kept silent, she would perish. That's what we need to understand today. It's a false hope to think that if we keep quiet in the face of evil, that we're going to somehow be safe. It doesn't work that way. All it takes for evil to win is for good people to do nothing. So now I want to talk about the Israel-Iran connection and bring this topic of justice right up to right now, what we're dealing with. This Israel-Iran connection, though, is fascinating Because when we look at the history of the Jewish people and the Persian people in the Bible, it's incredible. This is going to be good context. So I'm going to go into a little detail, summarize things, which you probably already know, but it's important to think about it within this framework of Israel and social justice. This relationship between the Jewish people and the Persian people is 2,500 years old. And now Israel's involved in a war, because remember, the Iranian regime declared the war, with this evil regime who has really taken over this ancient land. The current battle that the whole Western world is in with the radical Islamist regime is very much a battle for justice, not just for Israel, but for the people of Iran who have been taken over and been oppressed by this regime, and also for the future of all of Western civilization, including us. The land we now call Iran and its people play an important role in the history of the Jewish people, not just past, not just present, but also future. There are a lot of prophecies about this as well, which I'll give you a few. What we now know as Iran was known in antiquity as Elam and Media Persia. Elam and the kingdoms of Media Persia occupy a significant place in the Bible from the time of Abraham to the reigns of the Persian kings, Cyrus, Darius, Xerxes, and Artaxerxes, all of whom significantly affected the lives of Jews who had been taken into captivity by the Babylonians. And this connection, historical and prophetic, it continues to be demonstrated in prophecies about Elam and Persia. Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel all have specific words about Elam, which is it's in southwestern, what is now Iran, it's the southwestern part of Iran. But Elam is first mentioned in Genesis 14:1, when the king of Elam is one of 4 kings at war with 5 cities in the Jordan Valley. And in Genesis 10:22, Elam is identified as a son of Shem, one of the sons of Noah. Well, Shem is the son of Noah that the Semitic line is descended from. So that means that the Elamites, who are now part of the Persian people, and the Jews are cousins. So there's even that connection. By the 6th century BC, the Elamite identity merged into the rising Persian Empire. The name Persia is from the Hebrew Paras, and that's how it appears in 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and Daniel. The 4 Persian kings, and the 4 Persian kings who played a significant role in the history of Israel and are prominent in Ezra, and Nehemiah, and Esther are Cyrus the Great, Darius, Xerxes, Artaxerxes. If you've read all of these books, you are familiar with these names. Xerxes is the one who's identified is the same as Ahasuerus in the story of Esther. So that's the same. Okay, do you know what the Jews were doing, how they get to Babylon? You know about the Babylonian captivity, right? Before the Persian Empire, there were the Babylonians. They took the Jews into captivity under Nebuchadnezzar, the ruler of the Babylonian Empire. He's the one who destroyed the temple in 586, took people to what was Babylon then. And the book of Daniel begins by telling about the siege of Jerusalem. Well, after the fall of Jerusalem and the death of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar's son Belshazzar became king. And you all know this story from Daniel. I'm sure he was having a party. He had a party. They were all drunk. He brought out the gold and silver vessels that had been taken from the temple in Jerusalem, and they started drinking from the holy vessels from the temple, and they were praising the gods of gold and silver, and the fingers of a human hand appeared on the wall. And Daniel was called in to translate that, and Daniel told Belshazzar his kingdom was going to be given to the Medes and Persians. It happened that night. was fast. In 539 BC, Cyrus conquered Babylon. Cyrus is the first king of the Persian Empire. I just want to give you a note, and he was descended from Persians and Medes, so that's how he fulfilled Daniel's word that he was Media Persian. Okay, just a note on the history of these people and how words get corrupted. The Persians arrived in the region of what is modern-day Iran as part of a migratory group of a people called Aryans. Have you ever heard that term before, describing anybody else? The word Aryan means noble or free. It's referring to a class of people, not a race. We all know somebody who used that term to make it a racist term, right? Again, just taking a word and twisting the meaning. The Aryans were made up of many tribes. The term was used to describe a class. They considered themselves noble, and there were many races as part of that class. And they settled in the land that became known as Ariana, after Aryan. That's where we get the word Iran, from Ariana. So that's the history behind why these people are called Iranians, why the land's called Iran. That's for free. I just have to point that out because it's so absurd that all we know in the last century was some madman who said Aryans were a superior race and everybody else had to be done away with. Okay, Cyrus, the first king of Persia, used his lineage from the Persians and the Medes to present himself as a man of both peoples to unite them. And one of his many accomplishments was the establishment of a government. We're talking 2,500 years ago, a government that guaranteed people of diverse nationalities and religions the freedom to worship and continue their cultural traditions. When he became king, he's the one who issued his decree that said all the people who had been taken by the Babylonians and were exiles in what was now Persia, they could go back. That's when he let the Jews go back to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. Okay, another little side note, but this is important because you all are praying people. Daniel prophesied during the reign of 4 different kings. The first 2 were the Babylonians, and then he prophesied during the reigns of the first 2 Persian kings, Cyrus and Darius. Okay, Daniel 10 starts with, in the 3rd year of King Cyrus of Persia, Daniel was visited by a man clothed in white who spoke to him about things he had been trying to understand. Daniel 10, 12 through 13. The man who came to Daniel tells him that he'd been trying to get to Daniel for 3 weeks. I know you all know this story. Why didn't he get to him for 3 weeks? He said, the prince of the kingdom of Persia opposed him for 21 days. And finally, Michael, the archangel, came to help him. Well, this shows there's a spiritual battle over the kingdom of Persia. There is a prince of the kingdom of Persia. Well, principalities don't die. So guess what? There's still a principality over Persia that is motivating this hatred of the Jewish people and now of the Jewish state. In Daniel 10:14, the man in white told Daniel he came to help Daniel understand what is to happen to his people. We're Daniel's people, the Jews. What was going to happen to them at the end of days. So the takeaway from this is there's a spiritual battle over Persia. It involves the Jewish people. It's not going away. There's still that same prince of Persia. And the battle over Persia, which is what we're seeing manifested now in all of its glory, is related to what happens to the Jews at the end of days. That's what makes everything happening now so interesting, for one thing, but I'm pointing it out so that you all will pray. This is a spiritual battle. I know that you know that, but it's a spiritual battle. Okay, so I mentioned Cyrus is the one who let the Jews go back. And I just want to read the first, some verses in 2nd Chronicles. 2nd Chronicles 36, 22 through 23. In the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, in fulfillment of the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus of Persia, so that he sent a herald throughout all of his kingdom and declared in a written edict, "Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me," as a pagan king, who's also prophesied about in Isaiah, and Isaiah calls him the Messiah. Okay, Cyrus says, "God has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem, which is in Judah." That's pretty specific. "Whoever is among you of all his people, may the Lord his God be with him. Let him go up." That word "go up," is Allah, to go up. That's where we get the word aliyah. When the Jews move back to Israel, they're making aliyah. Well, Ezra chapter 1 starts the same way, goes into more detail, but it says the exact same thing. This pagan king not only allowed the Jews to leave, but he provided them with finances and authority to go back and do this. It's important to understand that back to the history between the Jewish people and the Persian people. Today's Iranians, and they prefer to be called Persians, by the way, they see King Cyrus as their father, as the founder of the Persian Empire, and they respect him greatly, and they know this history between the Persian people and the Jewish people. They know it. And they also recognize him for his achievements in human rights and politics. The Cyrus cylinder, which I have seen, it's in the British Museum, they found it, with this edict on it, is the world's first charter of human rights. And it's in the UN now. I mean, it's quoted in the UN of all places. It's been translated into all 6 official languages in the UN. So the Iranians now, today's Iranians believe it's Cyrus who represents them as a people and not these radical Islamists. They are crying out for freedom. They want deliverance from this regime. They have been chanting, "Cyrus is our father, Iran is our homeland," during these recent demonstrations on the streets. That's some of the things they were chanting. And the exiled crown prince, Reza Pahlavi, his father was the Shah who got kicked out in 1979. He wants to have a Cyrus Accords, modeled after the Abraham Accords, which are between Arabs and Israel. He wants to have a Cyrus Accord. Okay, so this is pretty amazing. And the flip side is that Israelis are so aware of this history and everything that the Persians did for them that I just came back. I was in Israel for a month recently, and what I heard, and it was with the missiles falling and everything, and the Israelis are happy to be going through that. They were happy to be going through it for the sake of the Iranian people. They said 2,500 years ago, Persia liberated them and allowed them to go back and rebuild the temple. And they're happy to be going through this for the sake of the people so that they can be free. And they said to me, so many said this to me, it wasn't scripted, it was just different individuals I talked to. Now it's our turn to pay back what they did for us 2,500 years ago. And this is the heart of the Israeli people. Talk about an example of loving your neighbor as yourself. That's it. Okay, the prophetic. Prophetic texts mention Elam and Persia in relation to end-time events. There's some conflicting words in here, and we're just going to have to see what happens. And I am not an expert on prophecy. I'm just telling you what the Bible says. As Isaiah 11:11, Elam is listed among the nations from which God will gather his scattered people in the end times, and that's happened. Jews have left Persia and gone back to Israel. It says, on that day the Lord will again recover with his hand the second time the remnant of his people, because the first time they were gathered back was in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. Now it's the second time. And it lists a whole bunch of nations, and Elam is in there. Jeremiah 49:34-35. This is the word of the Lord that came to Jeremiah the prophet about Elam. Behold, I will shatter the bow of Elam, the mainstay of their might. We could interpret what's happened right now with the destruction of much of the regime's leadership, their army, their navy. Maybe that's talking about now. Like I said, I don't know, but Jeremiah said that God said he's going to shatter the bow of Elam. But then verse 39 of that same chapter says, but in the last days I will restore Elam, declares the Lord. So we have a lot to watch for and to pray for, right? God's going to shatter Elam's bow. He's also going to restore Elam. And then Ezekiel 38-39, which we all know is the prophecy of the final war, Gog and Magog. Persia's prophetic role is especially evident here. Persia is listed among the nations allied with Gog in that prophesied end-time assault on Israel by a future geopolitical coalition, which includes Persia. We can see things happening now that this, that could be what's developing. We don't know. We have to watch and pray. And I'm just pleading with y'all to pray, to intercede like never before for Israel, for the Iranian people to be free, and for wisdom for our leadership, for the American leadership and the Israeli leadership who are working very, very closely together. So, speaking of that coming war between Israel and Persia, I want to bring this to a close by bringing everything back to our discussion of Israel and social justice. I just want to talk for a couple minutes about the concept of a just war. I speak to a lot of Christians. I get a lot of questions from Christians. What are we doing there? Why are we, for one thing, Iran's so far away. Why are we involved? Why does it matter to us? And we're Christians. Aren't we supposed to be for peace? Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. Yes, Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. I would submit to you that the two leaders right now that are doing this, President Trump and Bibi Netanyahu, have tried. We're going through this extended ceasefire, ceasefire. President Trump keeps saying, I'd rather have them make a deal, which to him means complete surrender, which that's what they don't want to do. And the Israelis, throughout their history, have tried peace deal after peace deal. It doesn't work. Yes, we're supposed to long for peace, and yes, Jesus has said, blessed are the peacemakers. But if you're dealing with people who don't want peace, and all they want to do is kill you, back to the first principle of justice I talked about, the right to self-defense. And so both countries right now are being highly criticized for what they're doing. Just recently in a sermon, the Pope said that God doesn't listen to the prayers of those who wage war. Well, I think he didn't read his Bible very well, because there's a lot of people who God listened to who waged war. So I just want to look at a few scriptural references and then talk about what's the definition of a just war. Do I have a few more minutes? Okay. First of all, in Exodus 15:3, it says, the Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. We also know that one of the names for the Lord that's used throughout the Hebrew Bible is the Lord of hosts. The host means the heavenly armies. The Lord is the leader of the heavenly armies. In Psalm 144, verse 1, the psalmist says the Lord trains his hands for war. In Exodus 17:16, it says the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Since you all know the story of Esther so well, you know that the history of, it's continuing the history, the war between Israel and the Amalekites. Haman, he was a descendant of the Amalekites. So there's war still going on between the Amalekites and the Israelites, even by the time of Esther. And the Lord is saying he's going to have war with them, with Amalek, because of what the Amalekites did to the Israelites when they were in the wilderness after they left Israel. And then in 1 Samuel 15, Saul was told to destroy the Amalekites completely. Well, he didn't do it. And he had his excuses, right? He lost his kingdom because of that disobedience. Saul, the prophet Samuel, came and confronted him and, why didn't you do what the Lord said? He had his reasons, but God was not convinced, and that's where the verse is, that God prefers obedience rather than sacrifice. One more example. Obviously, there's hundreds, but in Revelation 19, 11 through 21, who is it that's coming to, when he returns to earth, that's leading the last war? He's called the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. I'll give you a hint. So it's ludicrous to say that, yes, Jesus said that blessed are the peacemakers, but it's ludicrous to say that means that God's never in support of war, because sometimes it's just necessary. Okay, definition of a just war. I condensed a bunch of stuff, but there's 3 points. There must be a serious prospect of success. In other words, somebody shouldn't go to war just to cause havoc, just to create destruction or whatever. There needs to be a prospect of success. And the war must not produce an evil greater than the evil that they're trying to destroy. So you shouldn't do more harm. You just are supposed to be trying to get rid of evil. And the damage that's inflicted must be lasting. In other words, there needs to be a decisive victory. You don't just go to war, shoot up people, or bomb a few things and then leave. So 3 examples. One is a defensive war, like what I've already talked about in Esther and what Israel's done. And it's the right and the duty of leaders to defend their people. The second example is a war that protects innocents, such as Israeli and Iranian civilians. Israeli civilians have lived under the threat of the missiles and rockets from Iran's proxies in the area for years and years. When Israel goes and destroys those missiles and rockets, that is a defensive action to take them out, so they can't be shot at them anymore. And then the third example is a preventative war, such as preventing Iran from getting a nuclear bomb. And that kind of a war should be initiated in the belief that to delay something that's going to be inevitable, because Iran, this regime was never going to give up their pursuit of a nuclear weapon. To delay it means there's going to be a greater danger later. You don't want to just keep kicking the can down the road and, letting them gain strength. Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 8, we all know this text, where it says there's a time for this and a time for that, and a time for this and a time for that. It says there's a time for war. It says there's a time for peace and a time for war. So God is not opposed to war. God is opposed to an unjust war. God is opposed to people trying to take over territory because they're greedy and they want to take over territory. But those 3 kinds of wars come under the category of a just war. And I argue that the current operation that's being waged by Israel and the U.S. is just. And when it's complete, hopefully there will be greater stability in the entire world, because Iran has its proxies everywhere throughout the world, that there'll be greater security for Israel and freedom for the Iranian people. So I'm going to end there. Do you want to take questions? Or?
So I think we have a couple mics here to go around. And if you've got a question, Gianna and Ben are here with the mics.
I wondered if you could speak to I know there's a report of 40,000 that have been killed in this current thing. And I wonder if you've heard anything about arming of the regular Persian residents in order to maybe complete an uprising, because we know they are not armed. They are not permitted to have arms, and I'm just wondering if there's any hope of getting them armed so they can pursue their uprising. Thank you.
Yes, that is being worked on. And you said 40,000, I think was the number you said. That's the number we keep hearing in the media. But I guarantee what I've heard from people inside Iran and that have contacts in Iran, it's much, much worse than that, especially since the regime blocked out the media. So we don't really know what's going on, and only when we can get things from people in there. It's far worse. And yes, they are working. The Mossad, which is like our CIA, is on the ground. We have CIA on the ground. Weapons have been sent. It's still hard to get them distributed, but in the last couple weeks, there's been more explosions set off by somebody. There's been attacks on the Basij, is one of the military branches. There's the IRGC, the military. They're the ones that appear to be in control now, and then the Basij also, and they're the ones that were shooting everybody, just massacring everybody. A number of them are being taken out. They're being assassinated. They're being targeted by somebody on the ground who has weapons. So whether it's the Mossad or the CIA or people, civilians who have been given weapons or some combination thereof, something is happening. So.
You had said something about that Iran was supposed to be in a prophecy taken out, but wouldn't it be more that the regime, the evil regime, would be taken out?
Yeah.
And you had mentioned the southwest portion, and that is where that pilot went down, and they said that was they were more in line with the regime. So could that be what you were talking about, maybe?
Yes, it could be. Could be. The main thing to understand is that Elam and Persia is really important to God. There's so much in the prophets about it that obviously God's not finished with them yet. And God loves those people as much as he loves any of us. So we just have to be watching and praying for them.
Hello? Since this ongoing conflict with Iran, it seems like every time we take out a new leader, they get another one. And they all seem to have the same last name, Khomeini, which includes that name, Haman. And they always say no to any type of peace agreement. Do you think that'll end anytime soon?
Personally, I don't, because they all have to be taken out. You're right. Every time, President Trump has said something like, we're on the fourth level or something of leadership. We've taken out the first and the second and the third. And yeah, they keep coming up with more. And yes, they all sound like they're related. But I was going to say something else. I won't say that. Anyway, it does sound like they're related. But one of the reasons President Trump has given for this ceasefire and for waiting to try to get a deal together, because he really does desire peace. He keeps saying that. I mean, peace is preferable. He doesn't want to have to do any more destruction, but he will, based on what he's saying, if they don't agree. But the reason for the ceasefire is to give them a chance to come together, because when they all met in Pakistan a week or so ago, and they came away with no satisfactory conclusion. The Americans' conclusion from that, who were actually there and involved in that, their conclusion was none of the guys they met with had any authority to make any decisions. And they're all disjointed. You see different leaders saying different things that are contradicting each other. So what all the bombing and the taking out of leadership has done is disrupt their organization. It's disrupted their chain of command. It's disrupted their communication. And Iran is a huge, huge country. So there can be different factions doing different things in different parts of the country, not in agreement with each other, and they are arguing. That's the other hope for this regime coming down, is they're going to hopefully destruct from inside, because there's a lot of infighting going on.
My question is, it deals with ultimately the direction of prayer. in terms of we war not against flesh and blood principalities, but you mentioned the Persian spirit. So Israel in the United States is losing the war of social media big time. And you can tell the truth from the presidency or from Bibi Netanyahu. They tell the truth, but nobody believes them. So we're not dealing with flesh and blood, we're dealing with principalities. Right. My question to you is, do you have a suggestion on how to effectively and fervently pray into this ethereal social media thing that people are believing, but it's not the truth?
Well, like you said, it's a spiritual battle, so we need to be praying against the principalities that are over that. I'm sure there's principalities over social media now. You know, that didn't exist. But there would be some legions reassigned to that, and I'm sure that didn't exist 2,500 years ago, but I am sure there are principalities over it. The devil is the father of lies. So how to pray? Well, when 2 or 3 are in agreement, so get together and pray specifically against that and pray that the truth would be being exposed. I don't know if I should mention this. I have a tangible example. You know, there's a really prominent person who has a very largely watched podcast who has flipped and all of a sudden has come out against.
You can say it.
Trump. Okay.
Tucker?
Yeah. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, he became possessed. He told a story a couple years ago where he was attacked by a demon and he woke up, he was scratched, and it was ever since then, he just completely flipped to being anti-American, anti-Israel, blaming the Jews, et cetera, for everything. He is crashing in the polls now, and it's only because of a concerted effort of prayer, of bringing him down. There are so many Christians who are concerned. It's been a battle, and I was very concerned. I've written a lot about what he's done and said, because at first he was having an influence on Christians who stand with Israel, because a lot of his former followers, conservative people, often are also Christians, and Christians, he used to say some good stuff and come out on some good issues, and so people who are conservatively oriented politically often also times are also Christians, and they were saying to me, well, he was right about this, well, he was right about that, maybe he is right about Israel. And that was where the battle was, and there has been concerted prayer, and that's the only way to. So that's an example of how just getting in agreement with people and praying and realizing it's a spiritual battle, not try to argue, no point in arguing with him, but be informed yourself as well to be able to tell people the truth and point out where he's wrong. Does that help?
I just want to add to something as well. This is really important. This is more important than what I'm gonna bring up. This prayer is more important. But I read some things probably about a month or 2 ago that what's happening in the social media is all the stuff is being put out, and just in the natural, the way to respond to this is not with a lot of facts. Here we can do facts. I preach a lot of facts. We've heard facts tonight. This has been really good. We've all learned. Thank you. But the way to actually make a dent in the social media is with very short things that will touch a person emotionally. Facts are just not going to work on social media, because that's just prayer will work, but it's that short emotional blurb. But I'm all in favor of facts. You know that's me.
Yes, I was wondering if you're familiar with the book, I believe it's by Jonathan Cahn, called The Paradigm, and it talks about President Trump as being a type of Cyrus.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people make that parallel, and I think there's a lot to it. I mean, I think he's becoming more soft-hearted towards the Lord, and I don't know where he is, but he's on he is definitely on a journey where he's recognizing more and more the importance of the Christian faith. But at the beginning, I mean, in 2016, we got a president who was really, really rough, would be described as a pagan, ruler for sure. His whole past lifestyle and everything, and he's from the streets of New York, a businessman. I mean, there's no nastier place to do business than New York. He knows how to deal with the bullies in Iran. We couldn't have a better person in place to deal with the kind of people that are having to be dealt with now because of his whole life. So I would describe him as a pagan leader who ends up acknowledging the Lord, like Cyrus did in the one scripture you read that Cyrus, again, there's the arrogance of the leader, and we see arrogance, but the arrogance of the leader saying, well, God's appointed me to build him a temple in Jerusalem. What does Trump say? Well, I've done this, I've done that. There's a lot of parallel, but we couldn't have a more effective person right now for what needs to be done. And that's not meant to be a political statement. It's just recognizing the spiritual of what's going on.
Yeah, so 2 questions, Tricia. Number one, what is Camera doing in terms of social media to combat social justices? And then the other thing is, some scholars say that Darius and Cyrus are actually the same people. Have you discovered, I guess differently, that they are 2 distinct, different people?
Well, there are actually several Dariuses, and so that's also part of the confusion. When you look at the whole king list, Persian king list, there's multiple Dariuses. So the rabbis teach that there was a Darius before Cyrus, that Darius actually paved the way for Cyrus, but Cyrus was and that Cyrus was Darius's son, But in the biblical account, all I see, and in the Greek historians list, all I see is Cyrus and then a Darius who is the son of Cyrus. But in Ezra and Nehemiah, Darius, the king, is the king who got them to go back to building the temple after the exiles went back under Cyrus, and then they ran into opposition in the land. Can you believe it? There were people there that didn't want the Jews to rebuild, and there was opposition, and they actually stopped building for a while, and it was Darius who said, keep going, he was that king. So there is confusion, because when they were recording this, when Ezra is recording it, Nehemiah is recording it, they didn't tell us which Darius. There's a Darius 1 and a Darius 2, because they knew who they were talking about, but we have to figure it out now.
And what is Camera doing in social media?
Camera's always had a presence on social media, but in the last just about a year now, added a whole department that is solely focused on that. Because each department used to do their own social media, and there wasn't a unified strategy and coordination. In the last year, we've added a whole department of social media, and they are putting out everything for every department, and it's coordinated and having multiplied effect on every venue you can find.
We'll do one more question.
First of all, I was in the Air Force 30 years, flew 62 missions in the Middle East. And more of a comment than a question, but I don't trust when we talk about a 2-week ceasefire and all, I don't trust them, because they're hoping we're going to let our guard down, they're going to regroup and figure out another way to attack and win. So I don't trust them. And the other thing I was going to say is, when you got a bunch of rats, you want to hire the best rat killer you can get, and you don't hire him to be your pastor, you hire him to be a rat killer. So that's why I agree with you saying Trump is the best person at this point in our history. So
Well, I'll just say you cannot believe anything that a Muslim says, especially when in this kind of a position. Part of their faith, part of their doctrine is taqiyya, which means you're supposed to tell. Not only is it okay to lie, but you actually are supposed to lie to advance your cause. And what they want to do, they keep wanting to negotiate because it's a stalling tactic. They can regroup, rearm during that time, and they'd love it if they could keep this going for another 2.5 years and then get another president who may not do anything about them. So that's what, they have a long-range view. They think they're going to be there forever, and they know we have to go through an election every 4 years.
Thank you. Let's give it.